So today's message, I talked to Chris about this last night, 2 nights ago. Yeah. So the message is Sheva and the horns of Moses. The horns of Moses. What's that all about? So today we're going to talk about Sheva, a city in Israel. But along the way, we'll be doing an intense word study of the word horn, H-O-R-N. First, we'll talk about Sheva, then the word horn. Then we'll talk a little bit more about Sheva after that. So it's going to take a little bit of thinking, but hopefully you'll enjoy this. So you can see on the map here that Sheva is southwest of Hebron, down in the Negev. You see right here? So there's Hebron. You might remember we had talked about Lachish a few weeks ago. Remember Sennacherib had come down here, went to Lachish, then around the mountains, past Hebron, up to Jerusalem. So Sheva is a little bit more south of that, of Lachish. I'm caught. There we go. Good. Today, Sheva is the largest city in the Negev. It's often referred to as the capital of the Negev. It is the 8th most populous city in Israel. It has a population of over 207,000 people. And property-wise, it's the second largest city in the country, second only to Jerusalem. So property-wise, it's got 117,000 dunams. So that's about 30,000 acres. It's a big city. It's a huge area, and yet, and it's mentioned in the Bible multiple times. How many times did you hear about Sheva back in your church days?
Not very often.
Not much, huh? Here's some other pictures of Sheva. It's a city right in the middle of the desert. Here's another one. That's a great shot of it because you can see the desert just going on and on from there. Look at that one. Way out in the desert. If you looked at a satellite image of it, it'd look like this. So this is all Sheva over here. This big part. If you look east, you'll see it says Tel Sheva. This area over here. Tel Sheva. And you'd think that that must be where the ancient Tel of Sheva was located. But you'd be incorrect. That is actually a Bedouin town. Bedouin in Arabic. In Arabic, the town itself is called, Sheva is called Tel Bir Seba'ah. Seba'ah in Arabic means 7. Sheva in Hebrew, what does that mean? 7. Sheva in Hebrew also means 7. Sheva, the name, also has a double meaning. One of those meanings is 7 wells, and another is the place of oath, making an oath, and we're going to be talking about that in a little bit. The modern town of Sheva, what you're seeing on the left, is a Jewish town. It's a Jewish city, and a large portion of the population there is made up of Sephardic Jews, also Mizrahi Jews. Mizrahi, and some others as well that we'll be talking about. But let's start with who are the Sephardic Jews and the Mizrahi Jews. When someone asks you who are the Sephardic and who are the Ashkenazic, it's easiest to answer that the Sephardic Jews are the Jews south of Spain. Is that coming up on here pretty well? Yeah, you can see that. So there's Spain up here. So you kind of make a line and say all the Jews south are Sephardic, including Spain, and all the Jews north of there are Ashkenazic. That's a good and easy way to remember them. But if someone wants to get more specific, then it can get a little bit more complicated. On this map, they also point out the Mizrahi Jews. So those are Jews from Iraq, Iran, Libya, even Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, and some other countries. So you see the green, it's got a little thing up here. So these are where most of your Mizrahi Jews are from in the world. There's also the Beta Israel Jews down here in Ethiopia. The Beta Israel Jews. The Abu Yudaya Jews just south of them in this area. There's also the Kohanim Jews. Those are the Jews from India. I've met a lot of them. Matter of fact, we just found out my mom called me a day before yesterday and said that she got some more information on our DNA and we have a little bit of East Indian blood in us.
Wow.
Yeah, that was surprising. I was like, I feel like going and having some naan. Did you? I called up my brother-in-law, Samuel, and I said, I'm part Indian. He's like, well, you mean you're probably American Indian? I said, no, it's East Indian. He said, wow. I said, yeah. I said, I feel like I can now understand the plight of our people. And he's, what? Because I'm like 1%, right? It's real small amount. And I said, I think I should run for office. He thought I was serious. I said, I should run for office. He's like, yeah, that's a great idea, brother. It was so funny. I played that for like 3 hours on text and everything, and he was just like, okay, sure. I think he was thinking I'd lost my mind or something. So there's also the Kaifeng Jews. I don't know if you can see back there, but that's up in Asia and China, Tibet. Kaifeng Jews. There's the Italikim from Italy. That's up here. Those are the Italikim Jews. Also the Gruznim, which are north of Turkey, right up here. The Gruznim Jews. It's about 75,000 of them. It's not a small group. And these names can change their meaning as well. The name Mizrahim, its usage has changed over time. One of the definitions that they use for that, they use it to mean Jews who never left the Middle East. They would say those were the Mizrahim, in contrast to the Sephardim who went west to Spain, Portugal, and North Africa. So they're saying if you stayed in the Middle East, you're Mizrahim. If you're Sephardic and Mizrahim, if you stayed south. But if you went up to these other countries, you're no longer Mizrahim. And I don't like that definition myself. It smells of arrogance to me, and I prefer anyway that we all just call ourselves Jews. If you want to get more detailed than that, wait till we really know what tribes we're from and then go by that. But until then, Jew is just fine. Well, does that mean we shouldn't know these different words and their definitions? No, we should know them. So when we're talking to others about this, we'll know who they're talking about. So I just don't like it personally, having all these different names, and I don't always get what I want. In fact, I rarely do. Life kind of stinks that way. But, but I'm going to put this map up on Facebook so you can download. It's a really good map. It's really good for this. So you can download it. I would even suggest printing it, putting it up somewhere in your house so you get used to it and you start to learn the different names. It's very good. So modern Beersheba has many Mizrahi Jews, as well as Kohanim Jews, the Jews from India, and the Beta Israel Jews from Ethiopia. Well, since the 1990s, they've also had a huge influx of Russian Jews as well. So you have the large city of Beersheba, and it's Jewish. This all over here is Jewish. And Tel Beersheba over here, which is Bedouin. We don't really want to say Arabic because there's a lot of mixture in there. So they're Bedouin. So which one has the ancient Tel of Beersheba in it, would you guess? You'd think it'd be this one, where it says Tel Beersheba. But neither of them really. It's actually in between the two. You see this X right here? That's where Tel Beersheba is. So that's about 2 miles from this one and about a mile from here. This is a picture of the ancient Tel. Most of it was dug by Yochanan Aharoni, one of the most famous archaeologists in Israel when he was alive. He was a great archaeologist, but he got cancer and he died when he was 57 years old. He had immigrated to Israel with his parents when he was just a little boy. He was a German Jew. Where's Karen? He was German Jew. One of the most significant finds from Tel Beersheba, from that site, is an Israelite horned altar, which now sits at the Israeli Museum. Okay, you see those 4 pieces sticking up? One here, one there, one. They call those horns. Horns. These horns are mentioned in the Torah itself. We read in Exodus. Everything on there? Okay. 27:2, it says, "You shall make horns for it on its 4 corners. Its horns shall be of one piece with it, and you shall overlay it with bronze." Not this particular one that we're talking about. This is the one at the temple. But it talks about these horns on the altar. This is 27:2, 29:12. Says that you shall take some of the blood of the bull and put it on the horns of the altar with your finger, and all the rest of the blood you shall pour out at the base of the altar. Exodus 30, verse 2. It shall be 1 cubit long, 1 cubit wide. It shall be square, and shall be 2 cubits high. Its horns shall be made of one piece with it. There's quite a few verses. All these ones as well. So what are these horns for? What do they mean? The horns had different purposes. For one, they were used as part of binding the sacrifice to the altar. We read this in Psalms 118. Hashem is the Lord, which has showed us light. Bind the sacrifice with cords, even unto the horns of the altar. So that's one reason. They also had some various symbolism attached to them. Horns were often a symbol of strength or power. A symbol, they're even used as Hebraic idioms, horns. The Israelite altars were adorned with horns to represent the power of sacrifice. Owing to the special sanctity of altars, persons accused of various crimes could hold on to the horns of an altar as a kind of sanctuary. Depending on what it was, it could actually save you. If you went and you threw yourself at the altar and held on to the horns, sometimes that could save you, depending on what it was. Not always, didn't always work. Sometimes it couldn't save you, like in the case of Joab in English. You might remember his story. In 1 Kings 2, 28-34, it tells us about this. It says, when the news reached Joab, who had conspired with Adonijah, though not without Absalom, he fled to the tent of the Lord, that's the tabernacle, and he took hold of the horns of the altar. King Solomon was told that Joab had fled to the tent of the Lord and that he was beside the altar. Then Solomon ordered Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, said, go strike him down, even though he was holding on to the horns. So Benaiah entered the tent of the Lord and said to Joab, the king says, come out. But he answered, no, I will die here. Benaiah reported back to the king, this is how Joab answered me. Then the king commanded Benaiah, do as he says, strike him down and bury him, and so clear me and my whole family of the guilt of the innocent blood that Joab shed. The Lord will repay him for the blood he shed, because without my father David knowing it, he attacked 2 men and killed them with the sword, both of them, Abner, son of Ner, commander of Israel's army, and Amasa, son of Yether, commander of Judah's army, and they were better men and more upright than he. May the guilt of their blood rest on the head of Joab and his descendants forever. But on David and his descendants, his house and his throne, may there be the Lord's peace forever. So Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, went up and struck down Joab and killed him, and he was buried at his home out in the country. So Joab was killed right there in the tabernacle. Even the horns of the altar couldn't save him. Didn't work out too well that time. Amos used the image of breaking off the horns of the altar as a symbol of destruction. It says, in that day that I shall visit the transgressions of Israel upon him, and I will also visit the altars of Bethel, and the horns of the altar shall be cut off and fall to the ground. The suggestion there is of destruction. In other words, Amos was saying Israel was doomed and that there was no refuge for them. But let me go back to the point that the horn was a symbol of power. Some of you might remember a teaching I did a while back ago called The Rise of the Antichrist. That was one of my dad's teachings. In that teaching, I read a couple different portions. One was from Daniel 7:8. It said, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn. You guys remember this one? Before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Who is it talking about there? The Antichrist. That's right. Then again in Daniel 8:9, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the pleasant land. And I said in that teaching that horns represent power in Hebraic idiom. In this case, it's talking about how the Antichrist will rise up and topple other powers, other horns, other kings, and take over and start moving towards Israel, the pleasant land. Horns represent power. I was asked a while ago about the horns on the statue of Moses that Michelangelo made. I have some new ideas about that. I told my mom about this. She really liked it. I talked to a few others, so I thought I'd add it here. There's various schools of thought concerning this, about Moses. One has to do with an anti-Semitic slant against Jews, as perpetuated by the church father Jerome. That was the most likely to me, and it still may be that, in addition to what I found. First, I want to give you the most common school of thought on this. You might remember in one of the teachings I did, I talked about Jerome, and that he did a Latin translation of the Bible. Do anybody remember what it's called? The Vulgate. Good for you. Good for you. It was even a test question on one of the quizzes I gave back then. Anyways, in his Latin translation of Exodus 24:29, in English it says, in the King James Bible, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the covenant in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant. You guys remember that passage, right? It's like everybody thinks he was like glowing. He was glowing because he had spoken with the Lord. Makes sense. But in Latin, Jerome translated it as, and when Moses came down from the Mount Sinai, he held the 2 tables of the testimony, and he knew not that his face was horned. Horned. From the conversation of the Lord. Face, head, same idea. Well, in Hebrew it says karen. Not horn, well, not radiated. The word, we'll talk about what it means in Hebrew, but the word in Hebrew is karen. And it can be translated as gleamed. It gleamed. But Jerome translated it as horned. So most think it was just a simple mistranslation. But I'm not so sure of that. First, we know that there are Aramaic targums. We've talked about the targums before, right? Those are translations of the Hebrew Scriptures into Aramaic. Well, I discovered there is also a Greek targum. I didn't even know there was such a thing. I wasn't familiar with that. And there's this targum, this Greek targum is called the Targum of Aquila. Now, I am familiar with the Targum of Onkelos. Onkelos is the same person as Aquila. And the names Aquila and Onkelos are used interchangeably in ancient rabbinical sources. I even did a teaching showing that this Aquila is the same Aquila that's mentioned in the New Testament. Remember Aquila and Priscilla? It's the same person. Onkelos and Aquila are the same. His name was Aquila of Sinope. Is the same Aquila that's mentioned in the New Testament. Very interesting stuff. So in light of this new information, we have to change our definition of targums so that it'll be more accurate. We used to define it as Aramaic translations of the Hebrew Scriptures, which is the way most scholars define it, including scholars at Oxford. You can see here, Targums are Jewish, this is from Oxford, of Jewish Aramaic translations of books of the Hebrew Bible. If you look it up, that's what they're all going to say. But there is this Greek Targum of Aquila. So we used to define it like that. It says here, Targums are Jewish Aramaic translations. I wasn't sure if you'd see it, so I kind of tried to blow it up a little bit there. Can you guys see that? Aramaic translations. Yeah, that's what it says. Targums are Jewish Aramaic translations of books in the Hebrew Bible. I blew it up so you can see it, but not that kind of blow up. Like that. There, maybe you can see it now. There it is. That was the definition that I was taught in seminary, but now I know that is incorrect. So, I had to find or figure out a new definition, and the dictionary wasn't very helpful either. You look at the dictionary, again it says an ancient Aramaic paraphrase, that's completely incorrect, or interpretation of the Hebrew Bible. So that's not accurate. That's I even looked in the Encyclopedia Britannica. It also says a targum is an Aramaic translation. But I did find one definition that looked pretty good, and lo and behold, it was from the Jewish Encyclopedia. Well, that's where you got to go, I guess. You got to go to Jewish sources, don't you? It's usually best to go with Jewish understandings. And it says, in Mishnaic phraseology, the verb denotes a translation from Hebrew into any other language. Right? As into Greek. And then it gives a bunch of references, ancient rabbinical references. And the noun likewise may refer to the translation of the biblical text into any language. So that's more accurate. That's more correct. So, now that we know there is a Greek Targum of Aquila, we can move on concerning this point. So what does the Greek Targum of Aquila have to do with horns? Well, remember, we just talked about the church father Jerome, and that in his translation, the Vulgate, he wrote that Moses was horned. Well, that wasn't his idea. It wasn't Jerome's idea. He got that idea from Aquila's translation because that's what it says there. This is an ancient, this Targum dates to the 1st century, the time of Yeshua. And in this Targum, it translates the Hebrew word not as radiant, but as horned. So that begs the question, why would Aquila think that Moses was horned? Now we have to go to the very beginning, back to our thesis. Symbolically, what do horns or a horn represent in Hebraic idiom? It represents power. Power. See, I don't think Moses came down from Mount Sinai with his face radiating. I think he came down with a godly power that people were afraid to look at. You know, you spend that kind of time with God, you're going to change a bit. Right? And people are going to see that in your eyes. That power. And it's going to frighten them. That kind of power, what is shown on his whole face. Not radiating per se. It's possible that might have been still something to that. But still, you could see it in his eyes. And it'd be very scary, I think. I think he was given such an incredible gift of judgment, of knowing right from wrong, that to look at him would have been terrifying for some. It's like he'd look right through you, and you'd have nothing to say for yourself. All your arrogance would instantly dissolve, and all your shortcomings would reveal themselves to you instantly. That'd be hard to bear. It's hard for humans to look honestly at themselves. I know some may think, well, I'm a child of the King. I have nothing to hide. I'd stand tall before God himself. People that think that They just don't understand the character of God. And they don't understand his power. John the Beloved, one of Yeshua's disciples, was visited by an angel, just an angel. And this angel shows him all kinds of things we read about in the book of Revelation. We get all the way up to chapter 22. All that other stuff had already been talked about and seen, by clear up to 22. It says, and I, John, saw these things and heard them. And when I had heard and seen, I fell down to worship before the feet of the angel. He knew he wasn't supposed to do that. He's talking to this angel and he loses his mind. Starts to worship or adore this angel. And the angel said, don't do that. Don't do that. See thou do it not, for I am thy fellow servant, and of thy brethren the prophets, and of them which keep the sayings of this book. Worship, adore God more than you're adoring me right now. Because that's what was happening. John loses all touch with reality and starts to adore. The word there in English is worship, but it actually means to adore. And he begins to adore this angel more than he adores Hashem. And it was just an angel. Imagine Moses before Hashem. How much more we would lose it if we were to see the Father himself, or just to be in his presence. We'd fall flat on our faces. Back to horns. It was right about here in my studies, when I was writing this teaching, that I discovered that I wasn't the only one who thought that Aquila was correct in translating the passage using the word horns. My good friend Jeff Benner, I've talked about him before. When it comes to biblical Hebrew, he's the best. He is the best. He also agrees with this. You know, Hashem has amazing ways of confirming things. There's no one better at ancient Hebrew than Jeff Benner. He's a long-time friend of our family, and he's absolutely brilliant. This is what he writes. The Hebrew word in question is the verb karen, which we find in the following verses. This is his translation. And Moses did not know that the skin of his face had karen in his speaking with him. And Aharon and all the sons of Israel saw Moses, and behold, the skin of his face, and they were afraid to come near him. And the sons of Israel saw the face of Moses, that the skin of his face, or that area, had karen. And Moses caused the veil to return upon his face until his coming to speak with him. Whatever the karen is, we know four things from these passages. He says, karen suddenly appeared while he was talking with Yud-He Vav-He. That Moses was not aware that the karen appeared. When the people saw the karen, they were afraid. Moses covered his face with a veil when he was not speaking with Yud-He Vav-He. The question then is, what does the Hebrew verb karen mean? The generally accepted theory is that the verb means to project or protrude. But this is only an educated guess, as this verb does not appear in any ancient Semitic text, Hebrew or otherwise. But the noun karen, which is derived from this theoretical verb, does appear in many ancient Semitic texts, including Hebrew, Akkadian, Aramaic, and Arabic. And in the Hebrew Bible, it appears 76 times. And it is always translated as horn. That tells you something. Except in Isaiah, where it is translated as hill for poetical reasons. And the author chose karen because it sounds like the word karem, a vineyard. He goes on, then we have the verb karen appearing in the following verse. Psalm 69, and this will please Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh more than an ox or a bull with karen and hoofs. In this verse, it is very clear that the verb karen means to have horns. But the theory goes that this is a denominative verb. In most cases, Hebrew nouns are derived out of Hebrew verbs. But there are rare instances where a verb is derived out of a noun. These are called denominative verbs. So the theory goes that the verb karen means to project or protrude. And the noun, which is derived from the verb karen, means a horn, which protrudes out of the forehead. Then the verb karen, meaning to have horns, is derived from the noun karen. If this theory is correct, then the Exodus passages are speaking about some projection or protrusion that came out of his face, out of his head. But to translate this verb as shown, as they do in most translations, in my opinion, it is misleading, as this is more of an interpretation and not the true meaning of this verb, he says. But what if the verb in Psalm 69:31 is not a denominative verb, but the root verb meaning to have horns, which, by the way, Strong's Dictionary does indicate, and the noun karen, meaning horn, is derived out of it? This would make sense, as the verb karen, meaning to project or protrude, does not exist and is only theoretical. In my opinion, this theoretical verb was created in order for the karen on Moses' face to be anything but horns in that theory. In ancient Hebrew writing, in ancient Hebrew writing, the author will give a very concrete example of something that is more abstract. This means that the horns may not have been actual horns, but that the author chose this word for a specific reason. In Hebrew, El is anyone with power and authority. In the ancient pictograph script, this word would be written with the picture of a bull's head. You can see the horns on there, right? The letter Aleph, the shepherd's staff, and the letter Lamed. In the ancient Near Eastern world, the horns of a bull represented the power of a leader and were worn by leaders and kings as a symbol of their authority. Also, a shepherd's staff represented authority and was also carried by leaders as a sign of their authority. So this is some very ancient customs. This is where these things came from, carrying these staffs. Both of these symbols have survived to the modern day as a crown, which may be derived from the Hebrew word karen, meaning horn, and a scepter. That's where these things come from. Moses is identified as one of power and authority over Pharaoh. You can see that in Exodus 7:1. And we know that he carried a staff as a sign of his authority. And now in Exodus 34:29, if we translate the verb karen as horns, we have the author telling us that he also has this symbol for his power. So he agrees with this idea. Even the word keratin. Remember we did a teaching a long time ago about the shofar. Do you remember that? And I explained in that teaching that the horns are made of keratin. They might have a little bit of bone here, but the rest is all, even this one we did this morning. That's all made of keratin. It's the same stuff that's in your fingernails. Keratin. The word keratin comes from the Hebrew word karen. That's where it comes from. It's the same root word. If you look it up, you'll find that they say keratin comes from the Greek and that it means horns. But Hebrew is older than Greek, isn't it? So it must come from the Hebrew. They just didn't go far back enough in this instance. Here it is again. This is from the dictionary. But they're saying it's of Greek origin, meaning horn. But no one believes Greek is older than Hebrew, right? They should have looked up this word in the Bible. They'd see the Quran means horn. And that's where the word came from. On further research, I found out that there is an English translation of Exodus that says horn. From the Douay-Rheims. And when Moses came down from the Mount Sinai, he held the 2 tables of the testimony, and he knew not that his face was horned, from the conversation of the Lord. Pretty interesting. So why did this translation get it right? Well, because it is itself a translation from the Latin Vulgate. So now we've made full circle concerning the horn of Moses. Back to Beersheba. The Tell of Beersheba isn't only famous for its horned altar. Excuse me. It's also known for Abraham's well. Abraham dug a well there, but then there was an issue with it. Let's read about that in Genesis 21. It says, at that time, Abimelech, and Phicol, the commander of his army, spoke to Abraham. They say, God is with you in everything you do. Therefore swear to me here, by Hashem, that you will never deal falsely with me, or with my son. Why would he even say that? You know why he said that? Don't deal falsely with me. He's talking to Abraham. Well, if you remember before this, he told Abimelech that his wife was his sister. And Abimelech took her, almost slept with her, and then they had this revelation from God, said, don't touch her, you're a dead man. And he came back and said, Abraham, why didn't you tell me this? And Abraham, I was scared, I thought you'd kill me. It's like, you have dealt deceitfully with me. Abraham got schooled that day. He got schooled. So he's like, I remember you, don't do this, don't be deceptive with me. You will treat me in the land in which you have lived as a foreigner. Abraham said, I swear it. Now Abraham had complained to Abimelech about a well, which Abimelech's servants had seized. Abimelech answered, I don't know who has done this. You didn't tell me, and I heard about it only today. Abraham took sheep and cattle, gave them to Abimelech, and the two of them made a covenant. Abraham put 7 female lambs from the flock by themselves. Abimelech asked Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 female lambs that you have put by themselves? And he answered, you are to accept these 7 female lambs from me as a witness that I dug this well. This is why that place was called Beersheba, well of 7, or well of an oath, because they both swore an oath there. When they made the covenant of Beersheba, Abimelech departed with Phicol, the commander of his army, and he returned to the land of the Plishtim, the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called on the name of Adonai, the everlasting God. Abraham lived for a long time as a foreigner in the land of the Plishtim. So, in this portion, we see that the name Beersheba has 2 meanings. 7 wells, but also well of an oath. We also see that there was an issue concerning that well. Abraham digs a well, then someone seizes it. Then Abraham tells the king. But then it looks as if Abraham is then paying again for the well by giving these sheep and cattle. Well, why is he giving them that if he already owns it? It doesn't even seem that Abimelech is disputing that. He's like, I didn't know about this. I didn't know about this. In fact, the commentators say that this was indeed a payment. It wasn't a payment. If you look closely, you'll see that Avimelech agrees with Abraham and even says, I don't know who has done this. You didn't tell me. I only heard about it today. He's not disputing it. Avimelech doesn't want any trouble with Abraham. He knows where that leads. Okay? He's not disputing that. He remembers what happened between him and the episode with Sarah when Abraham didn't tell him that she was his wife. He'd almost slept with her. And if he had, he'd have been killed by Hashem. So the reason he gave Avimelech these animals was for the sacrifice that they were about to give to Hashem in order to ratify their oath with each other. He was right there with Abraham. He didn't have anything present. He said, look, I'll give you these. This is how we'll do the oath. This is how we'll make the sacrifice. It wasn't payment. Isaac also had a problem with the wells there. We go up to Genesis 26 now. It says Yitzhak, Isaac, planted crops in that land and reaped that year 100 times as much as he had sowed. Boy, I'd like to have that blessing. Adonai had blessed him. The man, Isaac, became rich and prospered more and more until he had become very wealthy indeed. He had flocks, cattle, and a large household. And the Plishtim envied him. Then it says, now the Plishtim had stopped up and filled with dirt all the wells his father's servants had dug during the lifetime of Abraham his father. Avimelech then said to Yitzhak, you must go away from us, because you have become much more powerful than we are. So Yitzhak left, set up camp in Gerar, and lived there. So while in Beersheba, Isaac did very well for himself, but it started to make the Goyim jealous. Well, I'm glad that never happened to us again. So what does it mean when it says they filled the wells? Wells were very important back then. Very important, especially in the desert. Right? And if you filled someone else's well, that was considered to be an act of war. An act of war. So Avimelech said, I don't want no trouble with this guy. This is Abraham's kid. We better get him out of here because they want to fight. They want to kill him. The ancient wells are still there. Now, which ones exactly belong to Abraham, it's hard to say for sure. But we will visit them when we go there this trip. And hopefully, one of them will be the one that our forefather dug oh so long ago. There is much, much more to learn about Beersheba. But that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed the teaching.